The silence in the royal suite was a weapon. It was heavier than the meter-thick walls, more absolute than the chromasteel door that had just hissed shut. Outside, a kingdom churned. Inside, there were only 2 heartbeats, and one of them was a lie. The lie was the steady one, the one that beat with the placid rhythm of a diplomat who was merely inconvenienced, not caged. Daphne stood in the center of the vast living space, her spine a rod of iron. The air smelled of cedar, old leather, and him. It was a scent like moss after rain and distant wood smoke, a primal anchor in a room of cold modernity. She refused to let it settle in her lungs. She refused to let any of this feel like anything other than a temporary and deeply insulting political maneuver. "This is unnecessary," she said, her voice dangerously calm. The sound was swallowed by the high ceilings and the dark, polished floors that reflected the recessed lighting like pools of still water. King Torquil stood by the door, his hand still resting on the biometric panel that had sealed them in. He was a king built of northern granite and hard decisions. His presence filled the space not with arrogance, but with an unnerving weight, a gravity that bent the room around him. He turned, and his eyes, the color of a winter sky, met hers. There was no apology in them. "The threat was specific, Daphne," he said. His voice was a low rumble, the kind of sound that vibrated in the bones. "They named you. They named the place and the hour. It doesn't get more credible. And your response is to lock the foreign ambassador in your personal quarters? What message do you think that sends to my delegation, to the Southern Pax?" She took a step forward, her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "It sends the message that you are ruled by fear, that one threat can grind your entire diplomatic process to a halt. It sends the message that I protect what is under my roof," he countered, his gaze unwavering. "My pack, my responsibility." "I am not your pack." The words were sharp, meant to draw a line, a muscle feathered in his jaw. "You are a guest in my territory. That makes you my responsibility. Until my guard captain Stellan finds the source of this threat, you are safest here." "Safest?" She laughed, a short, brittle sound. "You mean most easily monitored. I am a diplomat, Torquil. My power is in my freedom of movement, my ability to speak with your council, to persuade the unpersuaded. You've just stripped me of all of it." She gestured around the opulent prison. "You've made me a figurehead, a damsel." He finally moved away from the door, his steps silent on the dark wood. He walked toward the wall of black-tinted armored glass that overlooked the capital city, a glittering tapestry of lights under the rising moon. He didn't look at her, but she felt his attention like a physical touch. "I have seen what happens when threats like this are underestimated," he said, his voice dropping, losing its hard royal edge. "I have seen motorcades burn and peace talks end in funerals. I will not see it again. Not with you." The last 2 words hung in the air, freighted with a meaning she refused to examine. She had been in his kingdom for 3 weeks, negotiating a trade and territory treaty that would reshape the balance of power for the next century. They had spent hours across polished tables, sparring with words, testing each other's defenses. She had learned the tells in his formidable composure, the slight narrowing of his eyes when he was considering a concession, the way his hand would rest on the table when he was about to deliver a hard no. She knew the king. But this man, the one whose wolf she could feel pacing just beneath the surface, whose scent was an unsettling mix of authority and something far more personal. This man was a stranger. "And what am I to do?" she asked, her voice tight. "Sit and knit while you play king?" He turned from the window. A faint, humorless smile touched his lips. "The suite is fully equipped. Encrypted comms, secure network access. You can continue your work from here. My council will meet with you via holoconference." "It's not the same." "No," he agreed. "It's not. It's safer." She stared at him, at the absolute certainty in his face. He believed this. He believed he was doing the right thing, the only thing. It was this conviction that made him a powerful leader, and what made him, in this moment, utterly infuriating. He was used to his will being law, his word being the final one. He was not used to her. "And you?" she asked, her gaze sweeping the room again, noting the single massive bed in the adjoining sleeping chamber, visible through an open archway. "Where will you be staying?" The faint smile vanished. His expression became shuttered, guarded. "Here." The silence that followed was different. It was no longer a weapon, but a vacuum, pulling all the air from her lungs. "Here?" she repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "The threat was against you, but it's a strike against me. They want to prove my fortress has cracks. The most secure location in this entire citadel is this suite. The locks, the sensors, the life support, it's all tied directly to my biometrics. It is impregnable as long as I am in it." He stated it like a law of physics. "I am the key." Daphne felt a cold knot tighten in her stomach. This wasn't just a gilded cage, it was a shared one. Every moment, every breath, every restless night would be spent in his proximity. Her mind, the disciplined tool of a seasoned diplomat, raced through the implications. The political fallout was one thing. The personal cost was another entirely. She had spent a lifetime building walls around herself, perfecting a mask of untouchable competence. Torquil, with a single unyielding decision, had just threatened to demolish it all. "This is unacceptable," she said, the words feeling flimsy and inadequate. "It is the only way," he replied. He crossed the space between them, stopping a few feet away, close enough that she could see the flecks of silver in his dark hair at the temples, close enough that the scent of him was no longer a background note, but a full-blown melody. "Stellan will be thorough. It won't be for long." She held his gaze, a battle of wills playing out in the charged silence. She saw the implacable king, the resolute protector. But underneath, she saw something else flicker in the depths of his winter sky eyes. A deep, weary regret. He didn't want this any more than she did. And that, somehow, was worse. It made this a shared sentence, not a punishment he was inflicting. Her wolf, a creature of quiet pride and fierce independence, bristled. It hated being cornered, hated the feeling of being managed. But it also recognized the truth in his stance. It sensed the sincerity of the danger he perceived, a low hum of menace on the edge of its hearing. "Fine," she said, the word tasting like defeat. "But I will not be idle. I expect full access, Torquil, and I expect your Captain Stellan to report to me as well as to you." He gave a slow, single nod. "Agreed." He turned and walked toward a discreet panel in the wall. It slid open to reveal a compact, efficient kitchen. He began to prepare 2 cups of tea, his movements economical and precise. It was a simple, domestic act that was so at odds with the tension in the room it felt surreal. Daphne watched him, her arms wrapped around herself. The steel door was locked, the king was making tea, and the long, impossible night had just begun. Torquil felt her gaze on his back like a physical weight. He kept his movements steady, pouring hot water over the dried herbs, focusing on the curl of steam, the clink of ceramic on stone. It was a small, mundane ritual, a way to anchor himself against the storm raging within him. His wolf was a tempest. For 3 weeks, it had been a low, manageable hum, an appreciative rumble whenever the Southern ambassador entered a room. It had admired her fire, her sharp mind that cut through polite falsehoods like a shard of obsidian. His wolf had watched, and it had been intrigued. Now, it was clawing at the inside of his skin. Hours, safe, close. He gritted his teeth, forcing the primal thoughts back. She was not his. She was a foreign dignitary, a political necessity, and currently the target of an assassin. She was his responsibility, nothing more. The mantra felt hollow even in his own mind. He brought the cups to the low table between 2 severe but comfortable-looking armchairs. She was still standing, a statue of defiant grace. "It's chamomile and linden flower," he said. "Annalise, your aide, mentioned you preferred in the evenings." Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The fact that he knew, That he had bothered to find out such a small detail seemed to unbalance her more than the lockdown. Good. He needed her off balance. He needed her to see the man, not just the monarch, because it was the man who would be sharing this space with her. The king could command from a distance. The man had to breathe the same air. She finally moved, sinking into one of the chairs with a sigh that she tried to cut short. She picked up the cup, her long fingers curling around the warm ceramic. "Thank you." The quiet admission felt like a major concession. He sat opposite her, the table a pitifully small buffer. He could smell her scent, a mix of parchment, sharp citrus, and something uniquely her, like sun-warmed stone and wild honey. It was driving his wolf to distraction. He took a sip of his own tea, the bitter, earthy flavor of the root blend doing little to calm him. "Tell me about the threat," she said, her voice regaining its professional tone. She was on familiar ground now. Information, analysis, a single encrypted data burst sent to Stellan's public terminal. A line of text. "The southern dove will fall from the northern spire at the moon's height tomorrow. Your name isn't Daphne to the public, it's a code name. The Southern Dove. Very few people know it." "Which means the leak is internal," she finished, her eyes sharp. "Someone in your inner circle. Or mine." "My thoughts exactly. Stellan is vetting everyone who had access to the negotiation briefs. Every council member, every aide, every guard on rotation." He paused. "He is also vetting your delegation." She nodded, her expression grim. As he should. No one is above suspicion. She looked down into her cup. "They want to stop the treaty." "It's the most likely motive," he agreed. "There are factions, here and in the South, who believe this alliance is a weakening of our traditions. They see cooperation as surrender. They prefer swords to handshakes." "They're fools," she murmured. "Our supply lines are stretched. Your mineral resources are dwindling. We need each other. A war would bleed us both into dust." "Fools with conviction are the most dangerous kind." He watched the way the soft light caught the strands of her dark hair, the determined set of her jaw. She believed in this treaty with every fiber of her being. It wasn't just a job to her, it was a calling, and someone wanted to kill her for it. The protective fury that surged through him was so potent it made his vision swim for a second. His hand tightened on his cup, the ceramic groaning in protest. He forced himself to relax his grip before he shattered it. They sat in silence for a while, the only sounds the whisper of the air filtration system and the distant, muted hum of the city below. It was a strange intimacy, one he had never shared with anyone. His life was a series of public pronouncements and solitary moments. This shared, enforced quiet was something new and terrifying. He could hear her heartbeat. It had finally lost its false, placid rhythm and was now beating a little faster than it should. She was afraid. She hid it behind a wall of professionalism and anger, but he could hear it. His wolf heard it, and it wanted to tear down the world to find the source of that fear and destroy it. Protect. The instinct was a physical thing, a pressure in his chest. He needed a distraction. He rose and went to the comms panel, a sleek black screen set into the wall. "I'll get the latest from Stellan." He activated the secure channel. His guard captain's face appeared, crisp and clear. Stellan was a wolf of few words and absolute loyalty, his face a roadmap of old scars. "Your Majesty," he greeted, his voice gravelly. "The ambassador is secure?" "She is," Torquil said, deliberately not looking at Daphne. "Report. We're sweeping the delegation's quarters now. Nothing yet. I've put Leith on the data trace. He's the best we have. If there's a digital footprint, he'll find it." Torquil nodded. Leith was young, brilliant, and one of the few wolves who understood the intricacies of human technology better than the humans who'd invented it. He was a vital asset, but there was a restless energy to him that always put Torquil slightly on edge. "And the council?" Torquil asked. "Elder Vigdis sends her vociferous objections to the ambassador's quarantine. She believes it shows weakness." Vigdis believes anything short of a public execution is weakness, Torquil said dryly. Note her objection and carry on. What's the mood in the city? Quiet. Too quiet. The news of the lockdown is contained, but whispers are getting out. They know something is wrong at the spire. Let them whisper. Keep the perimeter tight. He glanced toward Daphne. She was watching the exchange, her expression unreadable. That's all for now, Stellan. Keep me informed. He ended the call, and the silence rushed back in, thicker this time. Leith, Daphne said, her voice soft. He's your tech prodigy, isn't he? Head of digital security. He is. I've met him. He seemed intense. He looks at this place, all this technology, like it's a cage. Torquil turned to face her fully. Her perception was, as always, unnervingly accurate. He comes from a traditionalist family. They believe a wolf's strength is in tooth and claw, not firewalls and encryption. Leith is caught between the world he was born into and the one he excels in. A dangerous place to be, she commented. He walked back to his chair but didn't sit. He stood, looking down at her, a strange impulse rising in him. He wanted to smooth the worried line between her brows. He wanted to tell her that he would let his kingdom burn before he let anyone harm her. He wanted to confess that having her here, in his space, felt less like a prison and more like a homecoming he never knew he was waiting for. He did none of those things. Instead, he gestured toward the archway that led to the sleeping chamber. There are 2 bathrooms. The one on the left is yours. Fresh linens, clothes in your size. Annalise provided a list. She looked from him to the archway and back again. The reality of the situation was settling in. The night was drawing on. Soon they would have to pretend to sleep, separated by only a few yards of open air. Torquil, she began, her voice losing its edge, replaced by something more vulnerable. It will be all right, Daphne, he said, the words feeling like a vow. He forced himself to turn away, to create a distance his wolf was screaming at him to close. He went to the window, placing his palm against the cold, unyielding glass. He could feel the faint vibrations of the city, of his kingdom. He was its heart, its brain, its protector, and tonight, its jailer. He stared at his own reflection, at the king in the glass, and for the first time in a long time, he did not recognize the man looking back. The man in the glass looked haunted. He looked like someone who was about to lose a war he hadn't even known he was fighting. The first few days passed in a haze of structured tension. Daphne worked with a ferocious intensity, turning her corner of the suite into a command center. Hollow screens flickered around her armchair, displaying treaty clauses, resource manifests, and secure communications with her increasingly frantic delegation. She was a whirlwind of focused energy, using her work as both shield and sword. It was the only way to ignore the man who shared her gilded prison. She learned the rhythms of his day. He rose before dawn, a silent shadow moving through the pre-darkness to a small, private training room she hadn't noticed, tucked away behind a paneled wall. She would hear the faint, rhythmic thud of a heavy bag, a controlled explosion of energy that spoke of tightly leashed power. He would emerge an hour later, his skin damp, the scent of his exertion sharp and clean in the recycled air. He would nod to her, a silent acknowledgement, before disappearing into his bathroom. They ate their meals in near silence. The food appeared in a dumbwaiter, prepared by the royal kitchens. He ate like a wolf, efficiently and with total focus, as if refueling for a battle. She picked at her food, her appetite lost to the constant, low-level hum of anxiety and an awareness of him that was becoming exhausting. She knew when he was watching her. It was a prickle on the back of her neck, a sudden warmth on her skin. She would glance up from a dense legal document and find his winter sky eyes on her, his expression thoughtful, unreadable. He wasn't leering, it was something far more unnerving. He was studying her, learning her tells, just as she had once learned his. On the third day, the friction finally sparked into flame. "You've been staring at that same paragraph for 10 minutes, he said from across the room. He was cleaning his blades, a set of wicked-looking combat knives, the metallic rasp of steel on whetstone, the only sound for the past hour. Daphne's head snapped up. I'm reviewing the water rights addendum. It's complex. It's not. It's straightforward, he countered, not looking up from his work. You know it by heart. Your wolf is pacing, Daphne. I can feel it. You need to let it settle. My wolf, she said, her voice dripping with ice, is perfectly calm. It's my patience that's wearing thin. She shut down the holoscreen with a sharp gesture. This is a farce. I'm negotiating with ghosts on a screen while the real conversations are happening without me in your council chambers. Vigdis is probably tearing the treaty to shreds right now. Vigdis is a traditionalist, but she's not a fool. She knows the numbers. She won't sabotage the kingdom out of spite. He set the knife and stone aside, giving her his full attention. What is this really about? This is about the fact that I can hear your heartbeat from across the room. The confession burst out of her, louder and more raw than she intended. It's about the fact that I can't think, I can't focus, because this entire suite smells like you, and I feel like an animal in a zoo. His face softened. The king receded, and the man looked out. I know. The admission was quiet, but it landed with the force of a physical blow. You think I can't hear yours? It's like a trapped bird every time I move too quickly. She stared at him, speechless. The anger drained out of her, replaced by a weary sense of shared misery. They were two magnets forced together, their polarities warring, the space between them crackling with energy they were both pretending not to feel. Then you understand why this is untenable, she whispered. I understand that it is difficult, he corrected gently. But it is not untenable. We are wolves, Daphne. We are masters of control. Or we are nothing. Are we? She challenged, a bitter smile on her lips. Because right now, I don't feel like a master of anything. I feel exposed. He stood and walked toward her, his movements slow, deliberate. He stopped in front of her chair, looking down at her. The proximity was overwhelming. She had to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. I have not had to share my space with anyone since my parents died, he said, his voice a low confidence. The silence of these rooms has been my armor for 15 years. You are not the only one who feels exposed. It was the most personal thing he had ever said to her. It was a crack in the granite, a glimpse of the man who had been made a king too young, who had learned to equate solitude with safety. Her anger dissolved completely, leaving something tender and aching in its place. Her hand moved before she could think, her fingers reaching out, wanting to touch his arm, to offer a comfort she didn't know how to voice. She stopped herself just before she made contact, her hand hovering in the charged air between them. His gaze dropped to her hand, then lifted back to her eyes. He didn't move. He didn't pull away, nor did he close the distance. He simply waited, letting the moment stretch, letting her make the choice. She pulled her hand back, curling it into a fist in her lap. It was too much, too soon. A single touch might unravel the tight knot of control she was clinging to. A small, sad smile touched his lips. As I said, he murmured, masters of control. He turned away, breaking the spell. He went to the comm panel. It's time for Stellan's report. She took a deep, shaky breath, trying to slow the frantic beat of her own heart. He was right. They were in this together. But the realization didn't feel like a comfort. It felt like a countdown. Sooner or later, that control was going to break. And she had no idea what would happen when it did. Torquil kept his back to her as Stellan's face materialized on the screen. He needed a moment for his own wolf to settle. The sight of her hand, reaching for him, had sent a jolt through him so powerful it had almost brought him to his knees. His wolf had surged, a joyous, possessive wave that screamed mate, touch, claim. He had crushed it down with brutal force. She was not a mate to be claimed. She was a partner to be earned. And he had done nothing to earn her trust, only demanded it. Stellan, he said, his voice rougher than he'd intended. Majesty. Stellan's expression was grim. We have a problem. Leith traced the data burst. The encryption was military grade, but he managed to crack the outer layers. The signal didn't come from outside the citadel. Torquil felt a cold dread seep into his bones. He had suspected it, but the confirmation was a blow. It was internal. Worse, the packet was routed through a dozen blind servers, but the origin point, it was a terminal in the Network Operations Center, the one Leith himself uses. Torquil went still. He could feel Daphne's focus shift, her attention now entirely on the conversation. Is Leith a suspect? He claims his access codes were stolen, Stellan said, his voice tight with frustration. He says someone spoofed his credentials. It's possible. He's the only one with the skill to cover his tracks that well, but he's also the only one with the skill to notice such a sophisticated breach. He's either our traitor or the only one who can catch him. A dangerous paradox, Torquil murmured. He glanced over his shoulder. Daphne was on her feet, her arms crossed, her face a mask of intense concentration. What's your instinct, Stellan? Torquil asked, trusting the man who had been his father's beta. Stellan was silent for a moment. My gut tells me the boy is too proud. He'd see getting caught as a failure. But his ideology, it worries me. He talks about the old ways, about strength. He sees this treaty as a pollution of our bloodline. Keep him on the trace, Torquil commanded, his mind racing. But put a shadow on him. Gamma airless. She's quiet and her senses are sharp. I want to know every move he makes. Understood, Majesty. And Stellan, double the guard on the server rooms and the power conduits. If our traitor is inside the system, their next move will be to take control of it. Already done. Stellan's gaze flickered, a sign of respect toward Daphne. Ambassador, I apologize for the delay in resolving this. Just find them, Captain, she said, her voice steady. Torquil ended the call. The room felt colder, the silence more menacing. The threat wasn't a distant monster at the gates, it was a ghost in the machine, one of their own. He turned to face Daphne. The fear he'd heard in her heartbeat days ago was gone, replaced by a focused, analytical calm. She was in her element again, a crisis to be managed, a problem to be solved. He's right, you know, she said. The one who framed Leith, if he was framed, they're not just trying to kill me, they're trying to cripple you. By turning my greatest technological asset into my greatest liability, Torquil finished. It's a brilliant move. It sows distrust, paralyzes my intelligence gathering, and makes me question my own judgment in appointing him. So what's your next move? She asked, her eyes searching his. She wasn't asking the king, she was asking him, the strategist, the wolf. We wait for the traitor to overplay their hand, he said. They tried a surgical strike with the threat. It failed. They tried to frame Leith to sow chaos. It has partially succeeded. They're getting bolder. Their next move will be louder, more destructive. He watched her process this, her mind working through the permutations. He admired her resilience, the way her fear sharpened her intellect rather than dulling it. His wolf, for all its primal instincts, admired it too. It saw her not as prey, but as an equal, a partner, a queen. Stop it. What if they don't make another move? She asked. What if the point was just this, to lock us in here together, to make you look paranoid and weak while your council turns against the treaty? It's possible, he admitted. But I don't think so. The language of the threat. Fall from the spire. It was theatrical. This isn't just about politics. It's personal. They want a spectacle. He walked to the window, staring down at the city lights. He felt like a target in a shooting gallery, the armored glass the only thing between him and a sniper's scope. But the real danger wasn't out there. It was already inside. It was in the wires, in the code, in the hearts of his own people. He felt her come to stand beside him, her shoulder almost brushing his. He didn't look at her, but he could smell the faint, clean scent of her skin, the citrus and honey that was uniquely Daphne. His hand ached to reach for hers, to link their fingers together, a silent alliance against the coming dark. You're scared, she said softly. It wasn't an accusation. It was a statement of fact, an observation. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "I am not scared of what they will do to me," he said, his voice raw with a truth he hadn't admitted to anyone, not even himself. "I am scared of what I will do to them when I find them." He turned his head to look at her. In her eyes, he didn't see the diplomat or the political asset. He saw a woman who understood the terrible weight of power, the fine line between justice and vengeance. And in that moment of shared, brutal honesty, the last of his defenses crumbled. He was in love with her. The realization was not a lightning strike. It was a slow, creeping dawn, illuminating a truth that had been there all along, hidden in the shadows of duty and danger. It was terrifying, and it was inevitable. Before he could say anything, do anything, the world ended. The lights in the suite didn't just go out, they died. The low hum of the filtration system, the faint electronic buzz of the comms panel, everything vanished. They were plunged into an absolute, suffocating blackness, and a silence so profound it rang in his ears. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then, a single, horrifying sound. The soft, metallic click of the chromasteel door to the suite hissing open. Daphne's breath hitched. The darkness was total, a physical entity that pressed in on all sides. The silence was worse. Every system had failed simultaneously. Not a power outage, a decapitation. Then came the click, the sound of the impregnable door unlocking. It wasn't a rescue, it was an invitation, a trap being sprung. In the blackness, a hand seized her arm. Not rough, but firm, immovable. Torquil. His touch was an anchor in the disorienting void. He pulled her back, away from the now open doorway, his body a solid wall in front of hers. "Stay behind me," he whispered, his voice a low growl, stripped of all its royal cadence. This was the wolf. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drum in the dead silence. Her diplomatic mind shut down, replaced by pure, cold survival instinct. What's happening? They've bypassed the mainframe, he breathed, his senses stretching out into the darkness. She could feel the tension in him, a coiled spring of lethal readiness. They've cut the power and seized control of the internal systems. The door opening? They're trying to lure us out. Or let something in. A new sound reached them, a faint, high-pitched whine from the corridor outside. It grew in intensity, a rising shriek that vibrated through the floor. "Sonic emitters," Torquil hissed, pulling her further into the room. "Non-lethal, but disorienting. They're trying to flush us out into the hallway." Daphne pressed her hands over her ears, but the sound seemed to bore directly into her skull. Nausea churned in her stomach. Her vision, useless as it was, swam with phantom spots of light. "Torquil!" she gasped, stumbling. He was already moving, his grip on her arm unerring. He navigated the pitch-black room with a familiarity that was absolute, pulling her along. "This way. The suite isn't safe. They control it now." "Where are we going?" "There's a service corridor. Old, mechanical overrides. Not on the main network. If we can get to it..." The sonic whine abruptly cut out. The silence that slammed back in was somehow more terrifying. Then a new sound, a rhythmic, mechanical thump, thump, thump from the ceiling. "What is that?" Daphne whispered, her voice trembling. "Fire suppression system," Torquil said, his voice grim. "But they've likely replaced the halon gas or the foam. Could be anything. Sedative gas, neurotoxin." The thumping stopped directly over their heads. With a loud hiss, panels in the ceiling slid open. Nothing came out. Not yet. "Move, now," he commanded. He didn't drag her this time. His hand slid down to grasp hers, his fingers lacing with hers. A silent, urgent message. "Trust me. Run with me." She didn't hesitate. She ran, her free hand outstretched, trying to ward off unseen furniture. He guided her through the living area, then into the sleeping chamber. The air was growing colder, a strange chemical chill that had nothing to do with the failed climate control. He stopped at the far wall, the one behind the massive bed. He ran his hand along the smooth, paneled surface. It's here somewhere, a knot in the wood grain. From the main room, there was a series of loud metallic clangs. What was that? She breathed. Pressure plates on the floor activating. The ones I had installed to stop intruders. They've armed them. So the living room is now a minefield? Essentially. His fingers found what they were looking for. He pressed. A section of the wall clicked inward and then slid aside, revealing a narrow, darker than dark opening. It smelled of dust and cold stone. Go, he urged, pushing her gently toward the gap. She scrambled through, her feet finding a solid, concrete floor. The space was barely wide enough for her shoulders. She turned back, her heart seizing with a new fear. Torquil? He was right behind her, sliding into the narrow space. He reached out and pulled the panel shut. It clicked into place, plunging them into a darkness even more absolute than before. The sounds from the suite were muffled, distant. They stood for a moment in the tight, cold blackness, her back against the rough concrete wall, his chest a warm, solid presence just inches from her face. She could hear his breathing, low and controlled. She could hear her own, ragged and fast. His hand was still holding hers, a point of searing contact in the void. Where are we? She asked, her voice a hushed tremor. A maintenance shaft. It runs the height of the spire. It's the building's original skeleton from before the retrofit. The system schematics don't show it. His voice was a vibration she felt as much as heard. We can get to the sub-level bunker from here, but it won't be easy. What do you mean? The person who hacked the system is Leith. It has to be, Torquil said, his voice flat and cold with certainty. And he knows about these shafts. He helped me design the sensor nets to cover them, before I decided to leave them off-grid entirely for this very reason. He knows I would come here. A horrifying realization dawned on Daphne. So he's prepared for us. He will have been, Torquil breathed. This shaft is now a gauntlet, designed by him for me. He's not just trying to kill us, Daphne. He's trying to prove a point, that my fortress is my tomb, that I am trapped by my own cleverness. She felt a tremor run through him, a wave of cold, contained fury. He was the architect of this place, its master, and his own creation, his own apprentice, had turned it against him. Then we will have to be more clever, she said, her own fear solidifying into a hard, sharp resolve. She squeezed his hand. You know the structure. I know how to analyze a problem. Tell me what to expect. She felt him shift in the darkness, his head turning toward her. She couldn't see his face, but she felt the change in him. The solitary, embattled king was gone. In his place was a partner, a wolf ready to hunt. The first challenge, he said, his voice a low, dangerous hum, is a 20-meter drop, and the emergency ladder has almost certainly been cut. Torquil's senses, honed by the absolute darkness, expanded. He could hear the faint drip of water somewhere below, the scuttling of a small rodent far above. He could smell the ozone from the fried circuits, the damp chill of the concrete, and Daphne's scent, sharp with fear but underscored by a steely resolve that called to every protective instinct in his soul. There's a utility ledge about 3 meters down, he whispered, his voice barely disturbing the air. We need to get to it. The walls are rough-hewn stone. There are handholds if you know where to feel for them. You first, she said immediately. I'll follow your exact path. He wanted to argue, to put himself between her and any possible danger, but she was right. She needed to see, or rather, feel the way. He released her hand, the loss of contact a sudden, sharp ache. Listen carefully. The holds are solid but small. Test each one before you put your weight on it. Don't look down. There's nothing to see. Just focus on the wall. He turned, his back to her, and faced the chasm. He swung his body into the shaft, his fingers finding the familiar, rough edges of the stone. His wolf, far from being panicked, was eerily calm. This was a physical challenge, a problem to be solved with muscle and instinct. It understood this far better than it understood treaty negotiations. He found the first hold, then the next. His boots scraped against the stone, searching for purchase. The shaft was a vertical tunnel of silence and cold. He moved slowly, deliberately, creating a mental map for her. Left hand up to the fossilized seam, right foot across to the granite nub. He reached the ledge, a narrow shelf of concrete barely a foot wide. He pressed himself back against the wall. "Okay," he called up, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. "I'm here. It's your turn." He heard her take a deep breath. Then the scrape of her shoes against the opening. He listened, his entire being focused on the small sounds of her descent. A soft grunt of effort, the slide of fabric against stone, the steady, rhythmic pattern of her breathing. She was scared, but she wasn't panicking. She was methodical. She was magnificent. Her foot found the ledge, and she stumbled slightly. He reached out instantly, his hands closing on her waist, steadying her, pulling her flush against the wall beside him. She was trembling, but her body was solid, real. She was safe. For now. She leaned her head back against the cold concrete, her chest rising and falling rapidly. He was acutely aware of her pressed against his side, of the heat of her body seeping through the layers of their clothes. The ledge was so narrow they were forced into an intimacy more profound than any they had shared in the suite. "Okay," she breathed. "Okay. What's next?" "The next section of the shaft is wired," he said, forcing himself to focus. "Laser tripwires. Leith knows I don't have my thermal goggles. He's counting on me walking right into them." "What do they trigger?" "Anything. Alarms, gas, magnetic locks that could seal us in this section. We can't risk it." He peered into the blackness below. There was no way to see the beams. "We need to find the power source. He'd have to run a separate battery. He couldn't jack it into the main grid without it showing up on a diagnostic, even a hacked one." Daphne was silent for a moment. He could almost hear the gears of her mind turning. "A battery," she murmured. "It would have to be close to the grid itself, for efficiency. It would create a small electromagnetic field, wouldn't it?" He stared in her direction, stunned by her logic. "Yes, it would. A tiny one, almost undetectable." "But you're not human," she said, her voice a thread of steel. "Your senses, are they sharp enough?" He closed his eyes, shutting out the distracting darkness. He let his wolf senses take over, pushing them past their normal limits. He filtered out the smell of the damp, the sound of their own breathing. He focused, searching for the faintest hum, the barest tingle of electricity in the air that didn't belong. There. It was faint, a tiny dissonant note in the symphony of the spire's dead systems. It was coming from below, and to the left. "I have it," he breathed. "About 10 meters down, tucked into an alcove on the other side of the shaft." "Can you get to it?" He considered the distance. Too far to climb down, too risky. "I can't, but I can guide you. We need something to throw, something small and conductive." Daphne was already moving. "My earrings," she said. "They're silver." She fumbled at her earlobes in the darkness. He heard a faint click. "I can't see you, Torquil. You'll have to tell me exactly where to throw." "Come here." He shifted, turning his body to face the opposite wall and pulling her in front of him, her back pressed against his chest. He wrapped one arm around her waist to hold her steady on the narrow ledge. With his other hand he took hers, the small, cool weight of the silver earring resting in her palm. "I'm going to guide your arm," he said, his mouth close to her ear. Her hair smelled of citrus and her own unique scent, a dizzying combination. He forced the distraction away. "I'll tell you when to release. The target is small. You'll only get one shot." "I understand," she whispered. He raised her arm, feeling the fine tremor in her muscles. He sighted down her arm into the pure black, aiming with senses she couldn't comprehend. He could feel the target, a thrumming point of energy in the void. "A little higher," he murmured, adjusting her arm. "To the left. There. Hold it." He could feel her heartbeat against his chest, a steady, determined rhythm. She was trusting him completely, blindly. The weight of that trust was immense. Now, he commanded. She threw. The earring was a tiny, silent missile in the dark. For a terrible second, there was nothing. Then a bright blue flash erupted from the opposite wall, accompanied by a loud crackle and the smell of burnt ozone. A shower of sparks cascaded down the shaft, momentarily illuminating a scene of terrifying verticality. In that brief flash of light, he saw them. A dense web of red laser beams crisscrossing the shaft just below their feet. They had been standing inches away from a trap that could have sealed their fate. The lasers flickered and died. The path was clear. Daphne sagged against him, a long, shuddering breath escaping her lips. It worked. You did it, he corrected, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. He didn't let her go. He couldn't. He held her there for a moment, his arm a band of steel around her, her head resting against his shoulder. In the echoing silence of the shaft, he felt a bond forged between them, something stronger than steel and more binding than any law. It was a bond of shared survival, of absolute trust. Come on, he said softly, his voice reluctant to break the moment. We're not out yet. He released her and began the climb down, but this time the darkness felt different. It was no longer empty, it was filled with the memory of her trust, the echo of her courage, and for the first time, the path ahead didn't feel like a descent into a tomb. It felt like a journey toward the light. They moved downward through the shaft, a slow, painstaking process. Twice more they encountered traps, each one a testament to Leith's intimate knowledge of Torquil's mind. A section of the ladder was electrified, forcing them on a treacherous detour across rusted support beams. A motion-sensitive dart launcher was hidden in a ventilation grate, which Daphne spotted by noticing a subtle change in the airflow against her cheek. They worked as one entity, his senses and strength coupled with her sharp, analytical mind. Finally, their feet touched the solid floor of the sublevel. It was a concrete basement, cold and vast. The air was stale, but blessedly free of the chemical taint from the suite. Emergency power, a system completely isolated from the main grid, provided a dim, ghostly light from fixtures set along the ceiling. They were in a long, wide corridor lined with massive support pillars. At the far end, Torquil could see the reinforced blast door of the primary bunker. Safety. He turned to Daphne. Her face was smudged with dirt, her hair a mess, but her eyes were bright, alive with adrenaline and fierce intelligence. She had never looked more beautiful. We made it, she said, a small, incredulous smile touching her lips. She looked at her hands, scraped and dirty. We actually made it. Before he could respond, a voice echoed from the far end of the corridor, amplified by the hard surfaces. I must admit, I'm disappointed. They both froze. Leith stepped out from behind one of the massive pillars, halfway between them and the bunker door. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a tablet, its screen glowing with lines of code. He looked calm, almost academic. His clothes were immaculate. I ran dozens of simulations, Leith continued, his voice conversational, as if they were discussing a training exercise. In 73% of them, the sonic emitters should have driven you into the hallway where the floor plates would have contained you. In another 20%, the neurotoxin in the fire suppression system was the optimal outcome. Leith, Torquil said, his voice dangerously low. He pushed Daphne slightly behind him, shielding her with his body. Leith's gaze flickered to the gesture. A flicker of contempt crossed his face. Always the protector. That is your flaw, Majesty. You seek to protect, to preserve. A true alpha seeks to strengthen, to cull the weak, to force the pack to evolve. By murdering a diplomat? By betraying your king? Torquil's rage was a physical thing, a burning heat in his chest. His wolf wanted to shift, to tear the traitor apart, but he held it back. This was not a place for beasts. This was a place for kings and consequences. She is not just a diplomat, Leith said, his eyes finally landing on Daphne with cold fury. She is a disease. Her treaty offers comfort, security, trade. It offers to make us human. It promises to dull our claws and quiet our instincts. I will not let you trade our birthright for a bowl of warm milk. Our birthright is survival, Daphne shot back, stepping out from behind Torquil. "And we will not survive another continental war. Your old ways will lead us to extinction." Leith's lip curled into a sneer. "The weak will be purged. The strong will remain. That is the oldest way of all." He looked back at Torquil. "I gave you a chance. I targeted her to wake you up. To remind you of what you are. A predator, not a politician. I wanted to see the wolf again, Torquil, but all I see is a man hiding in his own basement." "What you see," Torquil said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, "is a king who is about to pass sentence." Leith laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You can't. You see, there was one final simulation, the one with a 1% probability, the one where you made it this far." He tapped his tablet. On the far wall, next to the bunker door, a panel slid open. It was not a weapon. It was a countdown timer, its red digits glowing ominously. It started at 60 seconds. "The bunker is shielded against electromagnetic pulses," Leith said calmly. "A necessary precaution. Which means the pulse I am about to trigger from the main reactor core will not harm anyone inside it. It will, however, permanently fry every unsecured electronic system in a 5-kilometer radius. Everything. The city's power grid, communications, the life support systems in the hospitals." He smiled. "Thousands will die. And the last command the system received will be from a terminal in your suite. You will be seen not as a victim, but as a tyrant who slaughtered his own people. Your legacy will be ash." Daphne stared at the timer, her face pale. 45, 44. "There is one way to stop it," Leith said, holding up the tablet. "The kill switch is here. All you have to do is take it from me." He set the tablet on the floor at his feet. Then he looked at Torquil, and for the first time, his eyes glowed with a faint golden light. His own wolf was rising. "You want to pass sentence, King?" Leith growled, dropping into a low crouch. "Then come and enforce it. Show her, show me, show the ghosts of your ancestors that there is still a wolf on the northern throne." It was the final trap. Not a laser grid or a neurotoxin, but a choice. Save the city, but become the monster Leith wanted him to be. Fight him, wolf to wolf, and prove his point. Or let the timer run out and be damned as a failure. 32. 31. Daphne's hand found his. "Torquil, don't," she whispered. "This is what he wants." He looked from the sneering face of his betrayer to the terrified, resolute face of the woman beside him. He saw the city in his mind's eye, the lights going out, the chaos, the death. He saw the treaty, their one hope for a future, turning to smoke. He saw the path Leith had laid for him, a path of blood and rage. And he chose another. He squeezed Daphne's hand, then he let go. He didn't charge Leith. He turned and ran, full sprint, in the opposite direction, toward the corridor they had just come from. Leith's face contorted in confusion, then rage. "Coward! You would sacrifice them all?" Torquil didn't answer. He reached the end of the long hall, skidding to a halt in front of a heavy steel maintenance door marked with high-voltage warnings. He had put it there himself, a manual circuit breaker for the entire sub-level grid, including the bunker. 20. 19. He wrenched the heavy, unpowered door open. Inside was a single, massive lever, its handle coated in thick, red rubber. "Torquil, what are you doing?" Daphne cried out. "The pulse needs the core's full power to propagate," he yelled back, his hands closing around the lever. "If I cut the connection—" "It will feed back," Leith screamed, his composure finally shattering. He understood. "The entire charge will ground itself in the reactor. It will blow the whole sublevel. You'll kill us all." 10. 9. Torquil looked over his shoulder. He met Daphne's wide, terrified eyes. He gave her a look, a final, silent message that he hoped she would understand. It was not a look of goodbye. It was a look of faith. He saw the understanding dawn on her face. He saw her turn and sprint, Not for the bunker, but for one of a series of small, reinforced maintenance hatches set into the floor, designed for droids to access the plumbing conduits below. 8. 7. He put his entire weight into the lever. It resisted, groaning, designed to be moved by 3 wolves. His muscles screamed, sinews straining to the point of tearing. His vision grayed at the edges. For her. For them. With a final, desperate roar that was more wolf than man, he threw every ounce of his strength, his rage, his resolve, into the throw. 4. 3. The lever slammed down with a deafening crack. 2. He saw Daphne wrench open a floor hatch and dive inside, just as Leith, his face a mask of disbelief and horror, finally broke and ran for the bunker door. 1. A soundless, blinding wave of white light erupted from the far end of the corridor, where the reactor core was housed. It wasn't an explosion of fire and shrapnel. It was an explosion of pure energy. Torquil threw himself backward, away from the breaker, just as the wave hit. He felt a force like a physical blow, a crushing weight of pure power that lifted him off his feet. The world did not go black. It went white. And then, it was nothing at all. Act 3. The Long Way Home. The first thing Daphne heard was the ringing, a high, crystalline sound that seemed to come from inside her own skull, as if someone had struck a tuning fork against her bones and left it to vibrate. The second thing she heard was her own breathing, ragged, desperate, the sound of an animal fighting its way out of a hole. Because that was exactly what she was. The maintenance hatch had saved her life. The plumbing conduit beneath the sublevel floor was a cramped, filthy tunnel of corroded pipes and ancient wiring, and the energy pulse had passed over her like a wave over a stone on the seabed. She was alive. She was bruised, disoriented, covered in a fine layer of concrete dust, and she could taste copper in her mouth. She was alive, and Torquil was not beside her. She clawed her way out of the conduit. The sublevel corridor was unrecognizable. The emergency lights were gone, replaced by a sickly, flickering glow from exposed wiring that sparked and hissed in the ruined ceiling. The air was thick with dust and the sharp, metallic tang of ionized atmosphere. The massive support pillars were cracked. The blast door to the bunker hung at a drunken angle, half melted. And at the far end of the corridor, where Torquil had thrown the lever, there was rubble. Her diplomatic mind, the one that weighed consequences and calculated probabilities, shut down. It simply ceased to function. In its place was something older, something that had no use for logic or strategy. Her wolf. It did not howl, it did not rage. It rose inside her with a cold, absolute clarity that was more terrifying than any scream. Find him. She ran. Her shoes were gone, lost somewhere in the conduit. Her feet, bare and bloodied, slapped against the shattered concrete. She didn't feel it. She didn't feel anything except the sickening, yawning absence where his heartbeat should have been. For 3 days, she had tried to block out the sound of it. She had resented it, cursed it, used it as evidence of an untenable situation. Now, the silence where it had been was the most horrifying sound she had ever not heard. She reached the rubble. A section of the ceiling had collapsed, a cascading pile of concrete, twisted rebar, and shattered conduit. The breaker panel was buried somewhere beneath it. And so, presumably, was the king of the Northern Territories. She began to dig. Not with a plan, not with the careful, analytical approach that had made her the youngest ambassador in the Southern Pact's history. She dug with her bare hands, hauling chunks of concrete, tearing at twisted metal. Her nails split, her palms tore open, blood mixed with the gray dust, turning her hands into something raw and unrecognizable. She didn't stop. She couldn't. Her wolf was running the show now, and her wolf had made a calculation that her diplomatic mind had spent 3 days trying to deny. He is ours. He has been ours since the first time he said our name, and we will not leave him in the dark. You stubborn, impossible, infuriating man, she hissed, heaving a slab of concrete aside, her voice cracked. You do not get to make a noble sacrifice. That is not how this ends. I did not survive a 20-meter drop in the dark and a laser grid and a plumbing conduit to have you die being heroic. That is a terrible ending, narratively unsatisfying. I refuse. She was babbling. She knew she was babbling. She didn't care. Another slab, another piece of rebar. Her arms were shaking, her muscles screaming. A diplomat's body was not built for manual labor, and hers was reminding her of this with every heave. She ignored it. Then she heard it. Not a heartbeat, not yet. A groan. Low, pained, and unmistakably alive. She redoubled her efforts, tearing at the rubble with a strength she didn't know she possessed. A gap opened, and she saw him. He was wedged in a narrow pocket created by a fallen support beam that had caught the worst of the collapse. His face was gray with dust, a dark line of blood tracing from his temple to his jaw. His eyes were closed. His right arm was pinned under a chunk of masonry, but his chest was rising and falling, shallow, unsteady, alive. Torquil! Her voice was barely a sound. She reached through the gap, her torn, bleeding hand finding his face. His skin was cold. She cupped his cheek, smearing blood and dust across his jaw, and she didn't care about the mess, or the politics, or the treaty, or anything at all except the stubble under her palm and the warmth slowly returning to his skin. His eyes opened. They were unfocused, clouded with pain, but they found her. A ghost of recognition flickered across his face. "Daphne," he rasped. His voice was wrecked, a thin scratch of sound. "You're alive," she said, and to her absolute horror she was crying. Not the delicate single-tier diplomacy of a political funeral. Full, ugly, body-shaking sobs that she could no more control than she could control the tide. "You're alive, and I am going to kill you." He stared at her. A slow, dazed, slightly concussed smile spread across his dust-caked face. "That seems counterproductive." "Shut up. Don't speak. Save your energy for being alive." She wiped her face with the back of her hand, succeeding only in adding more dirt to her tears. She looked at his trapped arm, then back at the gap. "I need to get this off you. Can you feel your fingers?" He tried to move them. A hiss of pain escaped through his clenched teeth. "Yes, it's not crushed, just pinned." "Good, that's good." She was slipping back into problem-solving mode, but this time it wasn't a shield. It was a rope thrown to a drowning man. She assessed the masonry, heavy, but with the right leverage. A sound from behind her. Boots on concrete, multiple sets. "Ambassador!" Stellan's scarred face appeared in the flickering light, flanked by a squad of armed wolves. His expression, normally carved from the same granite as his king, cracked into something raw and desperate when he saw the rubble. "He's alive," Daphne said, her voice steady now, the ambassador reassembling itself around the woman who had just been weeping in the dirt. "His arm is pinned. I need your wolves. Now." Stellan didn't question her authority. He barked orders, and his wolves descended on the rubble with a disciplined fury. In minutes, the masonry was lifted. Torquil was eased free, his face going white with a pain he refused to voice. As they pulled him upright, his weight sagging against Stellan's shoulder, his gaze found Daphne again. He looked at her hands, her torn, bloody hands, and then at the pile of rubble she had been clawing through. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You dug me out," he said quietly. "Someone had to," she said, her voice deliberately light. "You made yourself the key, remember? Very inconvenient if you'd died. The door locks would have been a nightmare." Something shifted in his expression. A crack in the granite, far deeper than any the energy pulse had wrought. He opened his mouth. "Don't," she said softly. "Not here, not yet." He closed his mouth, he nodded, and as Stellan's wolves carried their king toward the emergency medical bay, Daphne followed, her bare, bloody feet leaving prints on the broken floor. She did not look back at the rubble. She didn't need to. The woman who had dug through it was not the same woman who had arrived in the Northern Territories 3 weeks ago, and she suspected she never would be again. 3 things happened in the next 48 hours. First, Leith was found. He had almost made it to the bunker. Almost. The blast door, in its death throes, had sealed shut on his legs. Stellan's wolves extracted him with rather less gentleness than they had shown their king. He was alive, conscious, and by all reports, furious about the indignity of being defeated by a door. Daphne felt this was poetically appropriate. Second, the city survived. Torquil's desperate gambit with the manual breaker had worked. The energy pulse, denied its pathway to the main grid, had fed back into the reactor core and blown the sublevel. But the city's systems, protected by the severed connection, had merely flickered. A blackout of 11 seconds, no casualties. The official statement blamed a scheduled stress test of emergency protocols. Elder Vigdis, Daphne was told, had called the statement insulting to anyone with a functioning nose, but had grudgingly agreed to support it. Third, Torquil did not die. He came closer than the royal physicians liked to admit. 3 cracked ribs, a dislocated shoulder, a concussion that kept his winter sky eyes unfocused for a worrying 12 hours, and what the lead physician described, with the particular understatement of medical professionals, as significant soft tissue trauma to his right arm. His wolf was strained, the physician said. Not broken, not gone, but pulled thin, like a muscle that had been asked to do too much. It would heal. It would take time. Daphne was given quarters in the East Wing, a beautiful suite with mountain views and no biometric locks, which she appreciated. She slept for 14 hours, showered until the water ran clear of dust and blood, allowed a medic to bandage her hands with a resigned sigh, and then did what she did best. She went back to work. The assassination attempt, paradoxically, had done more for the treaty than 3 weeks of careful negotiation. Nothing unites opposing factions quite like a shared near-death experience, and a traitor everyone can agree to despise. Vigdis, who had been the treaty's most vocal opponent, was now its most ferocious champion, declaring that any wolf who sides with that tech-addled whelp over the stability of this kingdom can discuss it with me personally. No one took her up on the offer. The treaty was signed on the 5th day, a formal ceremony in the Great Hall, attended by both delegations and broadcast across the territories. Daphne wore her ambassador's formal attire. She delivered her speech with the precise, measured cadence that had earned her reputation. She did not mention the plumbing conduit. She did not mention the laser grid, or the silver earring, or the narrow ledge in the dark. She mentioned cooperation, mutual benefit, a future built on shared strength rather than solitary pride. She did not look at the empty chair where the king should have been sitting. She signed her name. The Northern Chancellor signed his. It was done. Afterward, her delegation celebrated with the Northern Council over an elaborate dinner that she attended for exactly 45 minutes before claiming a headache. No one questioned it. A woman who had been dug out of a sub-level explosion was entitled to a headache. She did not go to her quarters. The royal suite had been repaired with remarkable speed. The door was new, the systems restored, the floor plates disarmed. It smelled of fresh paint and cleaning solution, and underneath it all, faintly, of cedar and wood smoke. Daphne pressed the chime. She waited. The door opened. Torquil stood in the doorway. His right arm was in a sling, his face still bearing the fading bruise along his temple. He was wearing a simple gray shirt and dark trousers, not the royal formal wear she was accustomed to seeing him in. He looked tired, thinner, and entirely, impossibly real. He blinked at her. The treaty ceremony ended 2 hours ago. Yes? You signed it. Yes. I heard it went well. It did. She paused. Are you going to invite me in? Or are we going to conduct this conversation in your doorway, like 2 people who haven't shared a maintenance shaft? Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. Something deeper. He stepped aside. The suite was the same, and it was completely different. The armchairs were there, the low table between them. The wall of armored glass still overlooked the city, now glittering with fully restored lights. But the tension that had filled the space like a held breath was gone. In its place was something tentative, fragile, new. She walked to the center of the room. She turned to face him. He was watching her from the doorway, his good hand resting on the frame, as if he needed the support, or as if he was giving her the chance to leave. "I came to return something," she said. She reached into the pocket of her formal jacket and pulled out a small, tarnished silver earring, one of the pair she had thrown in the dark. Stellan's cleanup crew had found it embedded in the wall of the shaft, fused into the stone by the electrical discharge. She held it out to him. He stared at it. "You kept it." It seemed like the kind of thing one keeps. She placed it on the low table. "It's technically no longer functional as an earring, or as an electromagnetic pulse disruptor, but I thought you might want it for the Royal Museum. Improvised projectile weapon used in the Battle of the Maintenance Shaft. Very dignified." He laughed. It was a short, rough sound, as if his body had forgotten how and was relearning. It was the most wonderful sound she had ever heard. "Sit down, Daphne." She sat in the same armchair she had occupied on that first night. He moved to the discreet kitchen panel and opened it with his good hand. She watched him work, one-armed, pulling down cups, measuring herbs. The same chamomile and linden flower. His movements were slower, less precise, hampered by the sling, but he refused her offer to help with a look that could have stopped a charging bull. He brought the cups to the table, setting hers down carefully. He lowered himself into the opposite chair with a barely concealed wince. "You're in pain," she said. "I pulled a manual breaker designed for 3 wolves and then got hit by an energy wave. I'm a little sore." The understatement was so vast it had its own postcode. "Your physician says your wolf is strained." He nodded slowly. "It is. It's quiet. For the first time in my life, it's not a constant presence. It's like a limb that's fallen asleep. I know it's there, I can feel it, distantly, but I can't—" He trailed off, looking down at his tea. "I can't rely on it." She heard what he wasn't saying. The man who had been defined by his wolf's power, who had used it to protect, to command, to sense the world with preternatural clarity, was now just a man. Injured, vulnerable, sitting in an armchair, making tea with one hand. "Is that why you didn't come to the signing?" she asked gently. His jaw tightened. A king with a wounded wolf is a king inviting a challenge. I can project strength from a distance. It's harder to do in person when you can't even lift your own sword arm. You lifted a 3-wolf lever by yourself 5 days ago. Yes, and I am now paying the invoice for that particular feat of stupidity. A dry, self-deprecating edge entered his voice. The interest rate is brutal. She smiled. It was a real smile, not the polished, diplomatic one she wore like armor. It felt strange on her face, like a muscle she hadn't used in weeks. They drank their tea in a silence that, for the first time, was neither a weapon nor a vacuum. It was just silence. Comfortable, companionable. The kind of silence that exists between two people who have seen each other at their worst and have decided, quietly and without fanfare, that they are not going anywhere. He set his cup down first. "Daphne, Torkel, you dug through a collapsed ceiling with your bare hands. We've established this. Why?" She looked at him. The question was simple. The answer was not. Or rather, it was, and that was the problem. The answer was devastatingly, terrifyingly simple, and she had spent the last 5 days trying to dress it up in the language of politics and duty and diplomatic obligation, and it refused to wear the costume. "Because you are the key," she said carefully. "You said so yourself. The locks, the sensors." "Daphne." She stopped. He was looking at her with those winter sky eyes, clear and steady despite the bruising, despite the pain. The king was nowhere to be seen. This was the man, the one who made tea from memory, who hadn't shared his space in 15 years, who had thrown himself between her and an energy pulse without a second's hesitation. She set her own cup down. Her bandaged hands were trembling. "Because my wolf would not let me stop," she said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper. "Because when I couldn't hear your heartbeat, it was as if someone had turned off the sun. Because I have spent 3 weeks trying to pretend that what I feel for you is professional respect and diplomatic admiration, and I am—" She paused, steadied herself. "I am a very good diplomat, Torkil. I am excellent at pretending. But I am not that good." The silence that followed was the loudest thing in the room. He stood. It cost him. She could see it in the way his jaw set, the careful way he shifted his weight. He crossed the small distance between the chairs and stood before her, exactly as he had on that third night, looking down at her with an expression that was no longer shuttered or guarded or kingly. It was open, completely, devastatingly open. The granite had cracked, and what was underneath was not cold stone. It was fire. "I fell in love with you," he said, his voice rough, stripped bare of all its royal polish. "Standing at that window, 5 days ago, before the lights went out. I had just realized it. I hadn't even had time to be properly terrified by it before the world exploded." He paused, a flicker of that dry, unexpected humor surfacing. "Which, I've decided, is the universe's way of telling me I have terrible timing." She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "The worst." "I told myself you were a responsibility," he continued, his voice gentler now. "A partner to be earned, not claimed. And I still believe that. You are not a prize to be won or a territory to be annexed. You are—" He searched for the word, his brow furrowing. "You are a force of nature, and I would no more try to own you than I would try to own the tide." "That," she said, her eyes bright, "is quite possibly the most romantic thing anyone has ever said to me. And I have been courted by the Gamma of the Eastern Marshes, who once wrote me a 14-page poem comparing my eyes to twin moons. Were the moons at least complimentary? They were orbs of lambent sorrow." I was deeply concerned for his mental state. He laughed again, a real one this time, warm and low, and it broke something open between them. The last wall, the final fortification. Her hand rose. This time she did not stop it. Her fingers found his, the ones hanging at his side below the sling. His hand was warm, calloused, dusted with the faintest tremor. She laced her fingers through his, and the contact sent a shockwave through her that made the energy pulse feel like a static charge. He inhaled sharply. His fingers tightened around hers. "I am going back to the Southern Territories," she said, holding his gaze. "The treaty requires ratification by our council. It will take weeks, possibly months." "I know. This will be complicated. A northern king and a southern ambassador. Every faction with a grudge will have an opinion. Vigdis will probably declare it a sign of the apocalypse. Vigdis will declare it a strategic masterstroke and claim she orchestrated the entire thing," he corrected. "She's a traditionalist, not a fool. A mating alliance between North and South would be the most significant political event in a century." "Is that what this is?" she asked softly. "A mating alliance?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then he lowered himself, slowly, painfully, with a stubborn refusal of assistance that made her want to both help him and strangle him, until he was kneeling in front of her chair. His hand still held hers. His winter sky eyes, bruised and tired and more honest than she had ever seen them, were level with hers. "It is whatever you decide it is," he said. "I will not claim you, Daphne. I will not cage you or keep you or make decisions for you ever again. I will ask. And I am asking." He brought her hand to his lips and pressed a single, careful kiss to her bruised knuckles. "Stay." "I just told you I have to leave," she whispered. "I know. Stay anyway. Not in this room, not in this tower. Stay in this." He pressed her hand against his chest, over his heart. She could feel it beating, steady, strong. Not the placid rhythm of a king who was merely inconvenienced. The honest, slightly too fast rhythm of a man who was terrified and hopeful and completely, irrevocably in love. She looked at his hand over hers, at the sling, the bruise, the dust still caught in the lines of his knuckles that no amount of scrubbing would remove for days. She looked at the 2 cups of chamomile tea on the table, growing cold. She looked at the wall of armored glass, at the city lights beyond, at a kingdom that was no longer just a negotiating partner, but something far more personal. She leaned forward and kissed him. It was not a dramatic, sweeping, world-stopping kiss. There would be time for those later. This was a soft, careful, deliberate thing. A press of her lips to his, tasting of chamomile and dust and promise. His good hand came up to cup her face, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw, and she felt the tremor in his fingers and knew it had nothing to do with his injuries. When she pulled back, his eyes were closed. The expression on his face was one she had never seen before. Peace. Absolute, unguarded peace. "I'll stay," she said. He opened his eyes. "In this," she added, pressing her hand more firmly against his chest. "In whatever this is. But I have conditions." "Of course you do." A smile, the real one, the one she had never seen until tonight. "You're a diplomat. First, you never lock me in a room again." "Agreed." "Second, I retain full autonomy over my work, my movements, and my decisions. I am not a consort. I am a partner. I would expect nothing less." "Third," she paused, a wicked glint entering her eye, "you replace my earring. It was a very nice pair, sterling silver, from a market in the southern capital. You owe me." He stared at her. Then the laugh came, full and rich and startled out of him, and this time it didn't sound like a man relearning how. It sounded like a man who had just discovered that the rest of his life was going to contain far more laughter than he had ever anticipated. "Done," he said. "I'll have my jeweler make you a pair, with a commemorative inscription. In case of emergency, throw at nearest electrical panel." "Perfect," she said. "Every ambassador needs a contingency." He rose from his knees, his body protesting with a series of sounds that she tactfully pretended not to hear, and settled back into his armchair. But this time he pulled it closer. The table between them, the pitifully small buffer that had once been their only defense, was no longer needed. His knee rested against hers. Her hand remained in his. Outside the wall of armored glass, the northern capital glittered under a high, full moon. The spire stood, battered and bruised and still standing. Below, the city hummed with the quiet, unaware rhythm of a population that had come within 11 seconds of catastrophe and had been none the wiser. Inside the royal suite, 2 cups of tea grew cold. A silver earring, tarnished and fused and utterly ruined, sat on the table between them like a medal of honor. And 2 heartbeats, no longer hidden behind walls of duty or control, settled into a rhythm that was neither placid nor frantic. It was steady. It was honest. It was, at last, the same.